I'm Anders. I thought I'd do a quick introductory slide because I've never done one in front of any of my talks ever. I've just gone, hi, talk, and not really kind of done an introduction. So my name's Anders Fisher. I come from Ipswich. I'm a web developer. I'm mostly known to be a front-end guy, but I've also, through the inspiration of IPROG and various other developers I've got to know, I've become more of a Rubyist. And more recently, I have been teaching people and going in and teaching people various different kind of levels of programming. One of the levels I've been teaching is I've been teaching statisticians how to build web applications. And I thought, what's the best way of teaching them? And I thought, I quite like Sinatra. It's quite a small, simple library, and it kind of gets across the main ideas of how servers give you pieces of internet. So, under the teaching bit, that's a very new one, and I don't know if I'm any good yet, if I have any proper reviews, but we'll find out. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about Sinatra, which is a library that's written in Ruby. Hello, Anna! So Ruby is a programming language, and it's primarily used server-side, but like every other programming language in the world, it's been rewritten to be used in all sorts of different environments, and people use them for building applications on your machine. They've been doing the mobile applications in it. I think there's a Ruby client-side library that compiles to JavaScript, and that's some kind of weird thing. So yeah, but it's primarily used as for people have mostly been using it for doing web services, and most people use it with a library called Ruby on Rails. Most people hear Ruby and they instantly hear the on Rails bit at the end. We'll probably do another talk on Rails later on, but this one's not Rails. And it was invented in the 1990s by a chap called Matt, who is a very, very clever chap and still very active in the Ruby community. And it's inspired by all sorts of different languages, but the main one that people talk about is they talk about Smalltalk and they talk about Perl as being the two that they've kind of taken the most from. And Ruby comes with modules, and this is a big part of the Ruby community, is packaging up bits of your code and sharing them in reusable ways. And in Ruby, because they love puns, they're calling them gems. And there's a website called rubygems.org, and there are thousands, if not millions, of Ruby gems. I'm looking over here because this is where all the IPROG guys have all sat together in a cluster. IPROG is the Ipswich Ruby user group, which runs every month. And so this is kind of their kind of thing. But yeah, so gems they're kind of self-curating. You can kind of pick up which ones are good and which ones are bad by how popular they are, and if they're not popular they tend to die off and they don't get supported. So a good way of finding out whether a gem's any good is look on the GitHub page, see how recent the commits are, see how many people are starring it, see how much following is behind it, and how good the documentation is. And that's a good way of finding a gem that matches what you want to do. There's loads and loads of different ones, and some of them come as full libraries, some of them come as little tools that fit together, and often people write gems specifically to fit into Rails, or specifically not to fit in Rails, they just kind of run on their own. So yeah, it's 3 gems probably going to mention today. Rails, I'm just going to keep saying it every now and then. Sinatra, which is the one I'm going to use to show the web application that this is being served by. And a third one called HTTP Party, which is a gem that's designed to make making GET and POST requests to other servers much, much easier. So Sinatra itself is a very, very light web framework. The web application I'm going to use today is written in one Ruby file. It's tiny and very straightforward to use. It's got some handy bits built in. It will look in the same directory as the Ruby file that you run for folders for convenience. So we've got a views folder and a public folder, so it's going to look into those for the right kind of files and serve them up in the right way without you having to do anything more than just create the files in the right place. It's got really useful functions built in for things like ERB tags, which stands for
Evaluate Ruby.
Evaluate Ruby, which is I tend to use it to write HTML, but basically it takes a string and it looks for these little tags and swaps out and executes the code that's in there. It kind of ends up being like a normal templating language. It also supports other templating languages like Haml, which sometimes causes a sharp intake of breath because it's really weird. And it also, so it's kind of got stuff built in for handling views, and it provides a really nice DSL, a domain-specific language, for GET and POST requests, and it does a whole range of other requests as well, meaning you can build a kind of really interactive web framework. And because you find yourself writing one file, or maybe one file that uses a class, it's very, very simple to manage. So you don't have to spend time finding config files or going. It's great for building really small applications. So what's it best for? I got into using it more when I was doing hack days, where I was having to turn around a piece of code in, a matter of hours, and I wanted to have something that ran and served things up. I was doing a lot of client-side work because JavaScript's kind of my go-to place, especially when you're creating something that wants some kind of effect after just a day's work. If you create a big flashy graph, people go, ooh, whereas if you create a web server that returns 1, everyone goes, okay. So building a client-side application with this is fantastic because it just serves your files up really quickly and you can get them online really fast, and you can build your own API layer behind it to kind of pull resources. So it's really useful for building that. It's really useful for building simple APIs. So if you're maybe taking data from other sources and parsing them or representing them in some way, or if you've got some kind of local file structure that you want to, say, expose. So say you've done some data processing on a CSV file, you could do the data processing, restore it as a CSV file, and actually serve that CSV file or load it into a database. And there's lots of really handy little things you can do in quite a quick turnaround. It's quite useful for simple websites, and it's quite good at consuming other APIs, especially if you use HTTP, because you can just literally fire off GET requests as you receive a GET request, and it kind of all joins it up together really nicely. And yeah, handling data as files. It's not so good if you're wanting to build something bigger and more long-standing. That's when you want to start looking at larger web application frameworks like Rails, and there's a kind of a pattern with using things like Sinatra, where you start off and you think, oh, I'm going to do something really simple and really quick, and I'll just do it this weekend. And you build it, and then you're going to go, oh, that's a good idea. What if I extend it and do it in this way? What if I add user logins? And then what if I want to have this class that gets extended from this one? And you start to grow your application. And then you kind of want to go, oh, I need an ORM, so I need to import some more modules in. And you starts to grow. And eventually you start recreating, well, I start to recreate Rails, because that's kind of what I've used most, but you kind of find yourself recreating frameworks that have already got there most of the way. So small, simple stuff is what this is for. And that's it for slides, really. But I've got a demo, which is my app that I've made this for, and I've got some other examples of some gets and posts and some actual Ruby. So you can see it's running on 4567 because they love their puns, and Frank Sinatra. And if you go to a URL you don't know.
No, wait, hang on, no, you skipped over that. Wait, how is 4567? Sorry,
that's how you start a song, isn't it? 4567.
Okay.
That's why it's at the port 4567 rather than 3000, 4000. And it's kind of full of these little hidden things about referencing to singing and Sinatra and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, if you just go over to, so I'm using Sublime Text here as my editor, and I have my one file here at RB. This is my server, and the bit that's actually serving my talk is line 1 and lines 6 to 8, and that's all you really actually need to include. There is a gem file here, which is where you provide a reference file to all the gems that you're including. So I've got Sinatra. I included CSV because I was going to pass a CSV file, and then I couldn't find one that had anything that I really wanted to show anyone. So I decided I'd just go over there and leave it. There's a reference to Ruby gems up here. So yeah, you create a Ruby file, and then you just say require Sinatra, and then if you use any other gems, you require those at the top. And then I've enabled sessions, but you don't. If you're not using sessions in your program, you don't need to enable them. And then you just put your roots in. So you do. I've got get/talk, and that's been my talk. And then I've called the ERB function. Oh, I've got it here. And by calling the ERB function, it knows to look for a view in the format of ERB. And so I've got a folder up here on the left, just at the same root level as the app.rb file, that's full of ERB. And here's my talk, which is just a load of HTML. Actually, I don't think I've got any. I'm just serving up an HTML file here. Sorry?
That last tab you were on,
Talk one.
no, the other one.
Ah, yeah, I was going to get to those.
Okay.
I was just going to do the talk one first. So to start the server, I go over to terminal and I can stop it. It's already running, so I'll stop it with Control C. And it says a little bit about me. This is set and the crowd applauds. And if you've got Ruby installed on your machine, which you can check with Ruby-B, I'm running Ruby 2. I can run Ruby. So I'm in the same directory as the file itself. So I've got my app.rb file. I can run ruby app.rb, and then it tells you that it's taken the stage on 4567. And so you go back to your...
Is there no pun-based start command?
Yeah, it's taken the stage on 4567.
No, like for the commands. I feel like there should be...
Oh, well, there should be like Sinatra sing or...
Yeah, something I've got... I'll think of something. Wait.
Okay. You can probably like post a
Yeah,
change.
yeah.
So yeah, I've got this one root here, which is /talk, and that's my talk running. And then I've got a second one here, which is an example of just a simple array in Ruby. So because I've been teaching people programming in general, I've had to do things like, this is an array, this is a variable, this is how you add things together, this is the difference between a string and a number. So I've kind of got into this habit of going through some very, very simple stuff. So some of this I'll skip over. But here's an example of me iterating over. So I've got an array of ages, which I've assigned at keyword so that it's referenceable from the ERB file. And then if I go to my ages ERB file here, so again it's using the ERB method here to look. This is a symbol, which is a reference to something that's not a string. It's not quite. It's something more than a variable. It's how would you say symbol? It's a symbol. Yeah. Without using the word symbol, can you explain what a symbol is to a non?
It's like a string, but if you use it twice, they're not the identical object. They're not just two things that are the same. So
they're pointers to the same things. They're pointers to the same reference of it.
Yeah. I guess like when you do two.
It almost feels like it's some kind of constant, but obviously that's a dirty word, so no, I'd say.
It's a constant. It just doesn't. It's not used for its value as such. It's just used to identify other things.
Looks like a label.
Yeah, or a label.
Or a label, yeah. Or a symbol. So yeah, I'm passing in the symbol of ages, and then when I get to my ages ERB file, which seems to be taking ages, I've got my HTML file. So I could have built this up using lots of partials, but I thought I'd just serve the whole file. You can see on line 12. So all the rest of this is just a straightforward HTML file. It's loading my CSS file because I've created a public folder here. And so Sinatra's just gone, oh, we're running a server, let's look at this public folder, let's chuck everything out in the public folder at root. So my public folder has got my style CSS and jQuery and my talk JavaScript. That's all in there and being served without any real effort from me. So if I've got anything I want to reference, like an image or a video or anything else, I can just stick it in the public folder and it's accessible. So yeah, for iterating over my array, I'm using this @ages reference, and then Ruby's got a really kind of expressive syntax. So if we're doing a loop, I do .each and then do, and then this can be any name I like, but I'm calling it age because I'm iterating over lots of ages. And then these here are our ERB tags, so it's just angle brackets with percents, and then to do a print I do %equals and then age. I think it's a fairly common, I've certainly seen something very, very similar in other languages. I know PHP's got question marks and other languages have other, and then you do and end, so everything between those two, you iterate over my array of ages and present them as a list of numbers. Just double check my roots because I'm forgetful, and I'll call it conveniently array rather than ages. And here's our array of ages in lovely big, ridiculously visible text. So I had written a quick example for doing, so those are all doing get requests, and you can also do posts, and you can do pushes, and all sorts of other ones. I'm going to do an example of a post now using jQuery, because that's what I know. So if I open up the JavaScript console, post. So I'm just going to post to my URL, which I have to find with my post to, it's the same string. It's going to be looking for the word here. So when you pass it in, it reads all the parameters it receives arrives in a params hash, which you can get the bits out of. So we're calling this one word, and FESuffolk. So at the moment, my word of the day is testing and if I do a post, it's now posted via JavaScript, and if I refresh the page, it's now FESuffolk. Not very exciting, but under the hood, I have posted from my server, I've received it at this URL, I've taken that word and I've stored it in the session, so the session will be running as long as my app is running. And then when I do a get request for the page, so when I refresh it, I then I pull the word out of the session and assign it to a variable, and then I run my hello.
Is session specific to Sinatra, or is Ruby doing that? When Rails calls session, is it the same session?
I think it's a similar principle.
But it's not a Ruby thing, it's a framework.
It's a framework thing. It's a web framework thing rather than, I mean, if you just write a Ruby file, it won't, no, unless it won't, it'll just...
But there's no standard library for session?
Wrap middleware thing, but I might be wrong.
So there you go. But yeah, I've turned sessions on by doing enable sessions, and Sinatra's gone through reading the Ruby file as you run it and gone.
So that sessions is a Sinatra thing then?
That specific one is a Sinatra.
It's not an underlying language construct?
It's not a language construct.
Okay.
It's a part of Sinatra. So to be honest, most of the syntax is Ruby, and everything else is Sinatra. It's kind of a way of thinking until we get to the HTTP party bit. So yeah, I've taken that and I've made it available as a variable, and then when you do the get request, it loads the ERB file and it prints it out, and that's how you saw what just happened. And then I've got an example where I'm pulling line breaks at the end of the file. I've got another get request for some speakers, and I am using a library called HTTP party, which I have required at the top, and I'm just using one method of it called get. And in Ruby, your brackets are optional. In this instance, I have not used them, but other people can use them, and it's kind of a will they, won't they? Sometimes with some people, I think it depends.
Generally speaking, or the consensus which I've come across is you don't use them unless you have to.
Have you got any counters?
On that side of things, but there are other people who will struggle out here the other side.
Yeah.
I tend to find I go with the flow of whatever else has been written already, and in this instance I've not actually called anything else, so I just went with one. And I see I've broken my rules straight away underneath there. So I'm using a library called HTTP, and all it's doing is doing a get to the FESuffolk website and get the speaker's JSON file. That's returning a response object, and that's got various different parts in it. But the part we're interested in is the body in the response. And then I'm passing that to JSON, which is a built-in library. I'm not had to require anything, it's built into Ruby. And just do a JSON parse, and that will then take whatever format our JSON file was in which in this case it's an array of hashes, and assigning it to a variable called speakers. And then I'm doing the same thing again, I'm loading an ERB tag, an ERB file called speakers, and I'm iterating over each of those, for each speakers, do speaker, and then in this instance I'm only interested in the name of the speaker. So if we go to speakers, some typos and everything. So there are some familiar names here. So these are the speakers coming straight from the FESuffolk website. So none of this data is available. So if we went off and updated the FESuffolk website tonight, and this server was running live, this would be updated for each of your requests. I could cache that locally, I could obviously there's optimizations, but for a way of handling data, re-representing it in a kind of neater format, it's quite a nice thing to do. It's especially good if your focus for your period of development is on exposing data and making it available to people. So we could have a graph of which speaker has the longest name or something equally arbitrary. But most talks would probably be a good one, just because they're weird.
Is there any way you can get information from the actual web page, not a specific JSON file?
Yeah, you can do a get request. So let's do one quickly. So I'm just writing down. There we go. So I'm doing a get. I'll give myself my own route locally to Google. Coding, commas everywhere. Hopefully they won't tell me off. So I've created a new variable called response, and then I'm going to this is just that response body is going to be just the HTML to return from that GET request.
It's going to be a redirect.
Yeah.
It is going to be. It's another one. Is it probably going to be a new redirect?
Static site.
I know what's a static site. My own website. That's a much better website to get.
I see, do it for self-promotion.
It's a little bit of self-promotion. So right, just going to pull the HTML from my own website and make it available. I'm going to create a new ERB tag, ERB file. Equals, yeah, print it out. If I hadn't put the equals there, it would just say, yes, there is this variable, not here it is to look at. Save that. Cross everything you've got. So I'm going to stop the server with Control-C, start it again.
Do you have to restart the server every time you change the...
Every time you change the Ruby file, it's the app.rb file, and I think any classes that it's using, you have to stop the server and restart it. I think you can use things like guard, which is a gem that looks at your code as you're writing it, and you can use that to kind of automate the process.
A good one
It's a
is
gem called
shotgun.
shotgun. Yeah. that
Shotgun.
Just you started with shotgun instead of the normal way, and then it just will auto reload your stuff.
Does Sinatra not have a watch or anything built in?
That's what I mean.
The focus of Sinatra is trying to have as little as possible, so you only have the bits you want. The idea is you should know.
I want to watch.
So,
I'm giving it some
there you go. You can just go and you just put a shotgun in, and you know. And as long as it doesn't fall over, which it seems like it might. Short answer to your question is yes. Let's skip this and keep going. There's an example of how quick it should be to build extra routes in. Comment that out. So yeah, comments in Ruby are just hashes at the beginning of the line. I'm just going to skirt over that and pretend it never happened. Again, that'll be another edit.
It should be your page up very well.
So, and the last thing I wanted to show you is that your routes don't just have to be static, you can put all sorts of other bits into it. So I've put a symbol in here for the int, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that int out of the parameters, I'm going to change it to be an integer, I'm going to multiply it by 10, and I'm going to turn it back into a string. So you can just put a string as your at the end of your get do block, and it will take that string and present it to the page. So in a way, these ERB tags, that's a function that's returning a string, and then it serves the string for you. So if you wanted to just return success, failure, number, whatever, you could just have it just returning that. It's quite handy if you're just doing a little test API or something to just see for yourself, see what's going on, what's the last error code, whatever else you want to find out. But yeah, remembering to put the toString at the end is a bit of a headache, because I often just go, oh, I'll just return a number, and then it errors, and I can't think to me why. Anyway, so what this should do is I should visit /timesend and then put an integer, and it should present me with the number that I've typed in, times 10. So hopefully, I do need to restart.
The error, interesting. The error was wondering what actually broke and now it's finished. So the web page with the error. I can't find this.
Oh, that was there. Sorry. You couldn't find that server. Is it anders.com or is it anders.co.uk or something?
It is .com. Oh no, what I've got. Well, my www's down, and that's all it was. Let's find out. Sorry. Curiosity here now.
To restart.
I do need to restart. This is why I should have included shotgun. And now I know I will, always. So when does it just restart it when you save?
Yeah, we did finally restart.
So
It
you
restarts
can
it.
load the HTML.
It's like Rails Auto stuff, it just reloads the classes when they change.
That's really handy. So yeah, here's my page loaded up locally without any of the CSS work.
And of course, you've got a JavaScript, which is
Relatively.
loads, but because it doesn't.
It's trying to load it as an HTML file
Yeah.
and presenting it. But what you could do then is you could then use something like Nokogiri, which is a gem that you can use to explore XML and HTML files. So if you wanted to strip, like Matt's Wikipedia stripping of trying to pull specific data off web pages, you could create your own that strips through.
So you could strip only like the P elements or the...
Yeah, or you could just go through and grab, say, the H1s,
Yeah.
and then you just get that core bit. So you could build your own little search engine. So yeah,
There's money in that.
yeah, I don't think there's anyone working there. So yeah, the times 10. That's what I was showing you. So this is a pretty ridiculous. So 10 times 10 is 100. And because I've got a dynamic root in there, write anything I like. And then if I write a word in there, I'm not sure. 0. So
Because 2i anything becomes 0.
there you go. And that's kind of a really quick and probably quite dirty introduction to Sinatra. But with just those little bits, you can actually turn around and create quite a lot of a web application. And it's really good if you're, like me, you've maybe got a certain leaning towards client-side development. You can put most of your business logic and your thinking in the UX end, and you can just use this to kind of serve your data up and request it with JavaScript. Any questions?
Does it have, because it's essentially focusing is on routing, does it have any like the namespacing or anything that
Yeah.
Rails does?
You can add a Sinatra namespace gem and namespace things.
Okay, so almost everything in it is
Extra
gems
gems
bring in,
bring in.
but they're Sinatra specific.
Yes.
So basically, you can build Rails again in Sinatra. So
Yeah, I wasn't going that far. I was just
No,
trying
no,
to do that.
but in fact, we had this. So Max and I are both part of Rewired State that Matt's kind of involved with as well. And we go along to these hack days, and we had a 2-day hack, and I was like, I'm going to use Sinatra. And Max was like, I'm going to use Rails. And then got to the end, and I was like, I spent most of my time rebuilding Rails. And then by the end of it, I'd kind of rebuilt enough of it to do what I wanted. And then I kind of thought, I just want one more bit, and then that would have made it Rails in its entirety. But because it was such a piecemeal stepping and building up effort, I started off with just going, just have one route, and I'll just get this one little bit sorted, and then, oh, what if we added this, and then, yeah, so. Any other questions? Thoughts?
On your last example, you didn't use ERB to actually render the number.
No,
I
I
was just
didn't.
going to say, mentioning that you can just dump text directly out if you want to, throw together a quick API.
So you could have done it just response to the body and remove the snap text. And
I could have, you're right. I was just live coding, starting to get some working.
Are you using it in Angular anywhere?
I'm mostly using it for really small stuff. I've used it for my rap misogyny app, which
Right,
my sister suggested, which is this is an application. In fact, that's the file icon for it. I'm not sure if it's still up. That's how involved with it I am. I can't even remember the URL of it. That's terrible.
I don't get it.
Anyway, so that's, I am using it for some live things, and for that I am, when you type in the name of a rapper, I've got some text analysis that's going through and working the ratio of positive to negative lines in each of the raps. So there's a Rap Genius, there's a Rap Genius gem, something's written on it just to connect to their service, so that you can just get really easily handleable lyrics. I'm then going through and analysing each of those, and then I'm storing them in a database. So actually, most of the time it just serves straight from the database, but if you request a rapper that we've not analysed, it will go off and do that as a process. But it's only really like one route because it's a single page app.